Thanks for coming today. I'd like to acknowledge that we are going to be talking today on Wajak Noongar Butcher and acknowledge leaders past, present and of the future. Super pleased that you've come out on what is grand final Saturday, which has caused some problems with John Campbell sitting over there. We were going to do a performance called John Campbell Watches the Grand Final, and basically we would do this, but the grand final would be on, but we were told we weren't allowed to, what's the thing? Broadcast. We'd get in trouble for copyright. So instead, today's performance is John Campbell is not watching the grand final, and neither is Nadia Hernandez, but you don't care. John, your family are here with you, but they are at a hotel somewhere watching the grand final.
They are. They're currently at the Brass Monkey, which is where I was until 10 minutes ago. My wife barracks for Geelong, the Cats, who are playing in the grand final, for those that aren't interested. And the Cats are up at half-time. They've got a pretty big lead, so...
So we're going to make this as long as humanly possible.
Point, that's why.
So, thank you both. Yes, so I'd like to welcome you both here to Perth. I think the first time for you, Nadia, and the second time for you, John.
Yeah, I came briefly, I think it was maybe about 5 years ago. I was in a touring show, the Basil Sellers Prize, and it went to Bunbury Regional Gallery, and I went down to Bunbury. I only had one day in Perth and a couple of days in Bunbury doing some workshops and some talks down there.
So what I thought we would do is, for today, just chat kind of randomly about little bits and pieces of your background, but it feels like as it informs the show. But maybe we should start with the subject of sport, but instead of you beginning, John, maybe Nadia, do you have any sporting background? Because I know about your performance poetry and kind of writing, interest in dancing, all that kind of stuff, kind of club culture, etc. And there's obviously a physicality to that, but perhaps not competitive. But yeah, what's your sporting background?
Did you know I had a sporting background?
I totally don't, no.
So I do.
Is there?
I do, yeah.
Wow.
I was a competitive swimmer.
Really?
Yeah, so I swam, I swam when I was younger, mainly to get rid of like my asthma.
Ah.
Yeah, and probably until I was like 19 years old in competitions. But I think that's where I got like my sense of discipline to make my work. Yeah.
Wow, so you did like the getting up super early in the morning and going
like
down the
at 5 in the morning, swimming twice a day, swimming on the weekends for 3 hours. I hated it.
Aw. What was your what was your stroke?
I did long distance and like individual medleys, so I was like hardcore.
Wow.
Yeah.
Were you like an ocean swimmer as well?
I wasn't. So this was in Venezuela and in Tucson, but then I did do the Bondi to Bronte, the ocean swim.
When you'd moved to Australia.
Sydney.
Wow. How far out are you when you do that? Like out in the sea?
I think it's about 3 kilometers out at sea.
Gee.
Yeah.
That's a thing.
Have you ever done that, John? or Robert?
No, God no. No.
Yeah, I got kicked in the face. Like when I ran under the water, I was bleeding. It was like I looked so tough.
Gee.
Yeah.
So
I bring that energy into the studio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you really feel that like a sporting background was good for your creative practice because of discipline and doing it when you don't want to do it? Is that something that you do need in the studio to like suck it up and get in there every day?
I think so, yeah. I think it's like all because of my swimming, my success. It's all to do with the 6 a.m. wake-ups.
Is it different when you're in the studio and you don't want to be there and you're making a thing? Are you capturing something different when you're in that kind of a moment, like a discipline moment rather than a like inspired, can't wait to get in there moment?
No, I think it's both. Yeah, I think they both go together. It depends. Like Melbourne winter, definitely discipline moment in the studio because there's no heating. It's really, really cold. But like the inspiration is the current.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. One of the things that, I wrote about it in the book that will come out next Wednesday, is that your work for me is like a kind of like a space to capture like conflicting emotions, like happiness, sadness, loss, optimism, and I feel like there are ways to kind of work through that. So do you kind of see that, like you're disciplined in terms of getting in there, and then it's like there's like an emotional labor to being in the studio?
Yeah, I think definitely for me, like, because the work that I'm making, my practice is recalling so many memories, and I'm having to access like these difficult moments in time, and you have to have like space for softness and then for like the reality of that. And I don't know how I make it work. I think music helps.
Yeah,
actually.
I remember you saying.
Yeah.
And John, it's a nice segue because you listen to music when you're kind of working kind of throughout, right?
Yeah, I mean, the music pretty much goes on straight away when I go into the studio, and I've got a kind of big collection of CDs, and I play the CDs. I do listen to the radio a little bit, but I very rarely work in silence in the studio, occasionally.
Yeah. Do you go through the same kind of emotional turbulence perhaps in the studio?
Not so turbulent. I mean, I do see it as kind of work in the studio. That, my studio's in the backyard of my house. It's separate to the house, and so it's always been important I've never been able to work in the house. And so just walking, a few metres across the backyard does feel like going to work. And I will go into the studio and get changed into my work clothes and work, put the music on, and then, I'm in and out of the house in my painting clothes during the day, but then change out of them at the end of the day. So, yeah, it's... And that day, things do go up and down during the day. Sometimes you're right, you feel like you're in the groove, and then other times it's maybe a bit boring. You're just going through, I've got to fill that in, or I've got to prepare that. There's a lot of that. It's not like, you wake up in the morning and bound into the studio and it's like, it's all happening and I'm all inspired. I do go in some days when I've got particular things to do and I'm, pretty keen to get on with that and see what might happen in that day. Of course, the great thing about going into the studio each day is you don't know exactly what's going to happen. I've got things I'm working on, but the beauty is that, you get going and whatever, and the day sort of takes you, or the painting takes you where it's going to take you for that day. So I do love my studio days. Yeah.
Will you get angry if someone interrupts you? Like, is there like instructions for your family not to bug you in the studio, or are you cool with
Nah, it's fine. You know, I'm not that precious about it. If they come in, it's fine. We sort of know that relationship. Yeah, it's not... That's always been too precious for me. Like, if people want to come round, it's fine. You don't get that many visitors to the studio, but people are welcome. And, it's not like I'm in there, 24/7 working away and it's, so intense. It just keeps going. I guess the thing is it's just very constant. You're always thinking about it. You always got something to work on. You're taking care of everything else around it. And so, the family come in as they need to. They're all off doing their own things now, so it's not such a big thing. But even when my daughters were younger and all, it sort of made it a bit more natural or something to be doing it, having them around.
Yeah. Nadia? Do you keep regular studio hours, or you strike me as a nighttime worker?
Oh,
I reckon.
really?
Yeah,
No.
you're a morning worker. Really?
Just like normal hours. Yeah,
Huh.
like get up in the morning, try and, get there by like 10 or something.
Mhm.
And depending on what I'm working on, I'll stay till 4. If I need to be there longer, like 6 or longer, or do my admin at home.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Huh.
yeah. And I don't mind interruptions
Yeah.
either. I have a cat that interrupts me.
Cool.
Yeah.
I wonder about maybe we'll just like go back to the sport thing.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe with John,
Yeah.
just so that kind of little thread's tied up. One of the things, about your work, and there's like, Mr. Football in there, and a few other things that reference your kind of working class background. And one of the things I was thinking about in terms of your work, and it relates super poignantly to Nadia's in terms of like not wanting to leave a place behind, and making a practice that carries something forth. And for you, that's like a sporting background, a physical kind of culture, and where that comes from in the western suburbs of Melbourne. Can you maybe talk a little about those early moments where you might have been negotiating, how do I bring this with me, or do I slice it off, or what that, kind of moment was for you?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I guess when I was a teenager at the local high school, it really was art and sport that were my two interests. I was playing sport, crazily when I was 16 years old. I played rugby union, AFL football. I'd train 4 nights a week. I'd play on Saturday, play on Sunday. I was kind of obsessed with it, and all sports. I kind of thought sport could be the thing that I would do. That I would continue. I was pretty good at sport and at team sport, and I thought maybe that could actually be my career. And I was interested in music at that time, and I also thought maybe music could be my career, because I had absolutely no idea about art or artists. I liked making these things at high school, and it wasn't really till the end of that at high school when you're making some decision about what to do. Most of my friends got apprenticeships at 15 years old and left school. I guess the equivalent now is year 9, year 10. And I'd thought about that. I thought, oh, that's what I should do. Like, what kind of apprenticeship would I do? And I got offered a job as an apprentice gardener at the local council, because I thought, I was into surfing and all, and thought, I can work outdoors and that'll all be nice. And it was just, things could have been very different if I had have taken that. I didn't take it in the end. I thought, no, I'll stay at school. And it really wasn't until, I found out about art schools and went to art school where that was the kind of turning point, actually. And then, of course, a whole world opened up to me at art school, and which was very different to my upbringing. The people that I'd met, I just grew up like in, everyone's kind of suburban upbringing in a way, and I liked that. It was pretty interesting, and but at some point, like when you're 19, you've got to get out of that, and art school offered me that way out, and then I thought, okay, maybe I can, I really like this, and I liked, met some artists, went to exhibitions, started to see what this was about, and thought this could be my world as well.
Yeah, and you had teachers, as we were saying yesterday, like Howard Arkley, Jeff Lowe, Jenny Watson, I guess John Nixon was around. So there was that, I guess also the Philip Brophy type of, kind of thing, and then the, ordinary modernism, I guess. So you had those influences that maybe could show you that you can like bring something of your background with you.
Yeah, and look, to be honest, there wasn't, I felt like I guess, you know, looking at a painting in the other room here, if people have seen it, that painting, All the Boys, like, you know, that was about, you know, of course, my teenage years in the suburbs, and I didn't have a car or a license, but my mates did, and, you know, that was massive in our lives, this idea of the car and where it could take us and what we could do. Now, when I was at art school, I didn't see that reflected that much in the other students or that much in the history of art. You know, I was interested in, you know, the famous John Brack painting of the car, of the family on the Sunday drive. And so things like that started to have a big influence, even though I did understand that Sunday drive because I did that with my family as well. But it was around that time, those sort of artists that Robert mentioned did encourage me with that and go, you can actually use this subject matter, you know, even though I hadn't seen it so much as I saw it in the history of contemporary art of this country. So that seemed like a space also that I could kind of get into. But having those role models and that encouragement was massive, you know, because there was other older lecturers and artists there going, I don't know about this, you know, I don't know, one, how you're painting it or about the subject matter. And I only needed a couple of people going, this is interesting, like you should keep doing this. That's all I needed to keep going.
Cool. I want to open this up in relation to you, Nadia, in a slightly different way. But before that, John, are you able to tell the anecdote of your primary school art teacher?
Yeah, well, it was my first year of high school, year 7, at Altona High School, and a teacher came to teach art called Jenny Watson, which she had just, she did actually teacher training, and this was one of her first teaching gigs at Altona High School, and she came in full David Bowie pin-up kind of mode. She had that hair, she looked incredible. We'd kind of never really seen anything like it. I mean, we were starting to get into Bowie and all, but you were a bit like, and we've got Bowie at the school, but it was so out of place and out of time that, you know, everyone was just mucking around in art and throwing shit around, and most of her time was probably spent controlling the class. But I was into it, I liked art, and I was trying to find my way, although she did write at the end of the year that, you know, Jonathan had potential, but he was very easily led, and if he didn't muck around so much with the other guys, it could have been in could have been in the top 5 students or something, which was funny. And I did meet her years later when I was doing my postgrad studies at the VCA, and her partner at the time was John Nixon, and John was doing like some sessional days would come in, and so I told John this story, and he'd obviously mentioned it to Jenny, and she then came in to do a sessional day, and we had this little moment looking at each other in the studio, and she went, I remember you. Oh, okay then. And we, you know, took this conversation on from there. And of course I still, you know her and see her from time to time. She lives in Brisbane now, but yeah.
Nice. I was just so impressed that she was your primary school art teacher. It's kind of perfect in terms of the path that she broke for so many artists, and you know, without her, it would have been a bit harder to do the type of work you do. I think
Jenny Watson was very influential. Like, she was one of the artists, and I think is still influential and possibly very underrated. She was really dealing with this idea of what it meant to live here, and what it meant to make work about who she was and her interests, and I really loved that. Like, the first things for me were her houses, you know, Box Hill suburban houses in Melbourne, and I'm like, I know that, and you know, that's being reflected in this contemporary art world. And of course she was very into music, and she did a lot of artwork about music. She was into horses. She painted beautiful paintings of horses, into cats, and you're like, wow, she is really painting her world, and that was actually very influential.
And that's a perfect segue to Nadia, because you grew up in a like I guess a practically creative kind of household and kind of familial situation. So you had a lot of people doing really interesting things around you, and it's my kind of feeling that there wasn't this sense that there was art over here and then other life, etc. Can you speak a little about the significance of that, your kind of upbringing in that kind of expansively creative sense?
Yeah, of course. So I was born in Mérida, Venezuela, and the city is completely. It's in a valley, and it's surrounded by the Andes Mountains. It's already like very beautiful and evocative. And even though no one in my family like pursued an artistic career, because I think it wasn't the popular thing to do at the time, or the safest thing to do at the time, my grandfather, he's a plant physiologist and was a professor at the university. My mom was a professor at the university as well, and my grandma always just, made things, anything, all things with her hands. And my uncle at that time, when he was younger, he was a musician as well. And I grew up in this environment with my grandparents, my uncle and my mom that was like totally enriched by the surroundings, but also just these everyday acts of making things and like making paper, making soap. And I think those memories really influenced my work and in the way that I try to also focus on this cotidianidad or everydayness, like capturing that in Australia, even though my family are like situated in different parts of the world. I'm using like those memories, or I'm using recipes or anecdotes that they're sharing with me over the phone, or in the brief moments that we do have that like intimate face-to-face contact.
I wonder, like, the decision to go to art school and kind of, where that sat with you. If your background was, like everyday life was creative to a degree, and you were interested in poetry and writing, and I'm assuming that a lot of that was personal in terms of like figuring stuff out, but you would do performance poetry and that kind of stuff. So there was some sense of an audience. But what was it that made you want to kind of push out into a professional, kind of career in that regard? And I know also you did fashion too, and maybe before the art. I can never remember this.
Yeah, so no, I didn't, and I never studied art. I didn't go to art school, which, yeah.
Damn, you wouldn't have got the show because you need the qualification. We don't show
have qualifications. No, I did study fine art, but it was a fashion major, so it did have the structure of the studio. And it's really funny because I think that breakups have really influenced my work throughout periods of time. And I remember I was going through a breakup and I was a teenager and I was like, you know what, I'm going to take control of my future and I'm going to study fashion design. And I told my mom and she was like, kind of like this classic immigrant story. She was like, oh, really? You want to study fine arts? What about like fashion with law? Or like, what about, I'm like, oh, maybe. She's like, what about fashion and journalism? And like kind of kept adding all these things, or business. And I was like, no, I think I'll just do fashion. And then after I studied fashion, I realized that I was really creative, but I didn't really want to work in the fashion industry. So then I studied graphic design. And then I studied web development. And then I studied millinery. So I did so many things. And eventually when I was working as a graphic designer, I started making these posters. And these posters were being created as a form to extend my solidarity to what my family were experiencing in Venezuela, like a lot of political turmoil. I wanted to, I was really inspired by like the work of Keith Haring and Sister Corita Kent and Atelier Populaire, and that sort of revolutionary aesthetic of poster making. And I really loved the idea that with Atelier Populaire that it was multiple voices making the posters, but there was no author. I thought that was really beautiful. And I started making these posters just kind of like encouraging people to go out and vote or to participate and to not lose hope. And like no one was seeing them except for my family, obviously, because I had no audience. But that was enough for me, just to send that to them as a token of like my love from afar.
Yeah. When was your first exhibition? Like how did that come about? Were you in a group show before you had a solo show, or like what was that little transitional moment?
I did have a show. I had a funny little exhibition in 2013 at an architecture studio that another artist curated. And I remember I was like I had so much respect for this artist because he was a painter. But he did tell me like, Nadia, you really need your master's. If you're gonna go anywhere, you need to get your master's. And I didn't get my master's.
Good.
Yet. But I did do this show in 2013. It was like, I had seen a book by Paul Klee, and Paul Klee had made like all these puppets for his son. And I wanted to look at, once again, like these familial histories and sort of these iconic historical characters in like Venezuelan sort of folklore, and reappropriate them, like reconfigure them as my own version. So I created all these, like a family of puppets. So that was my first show.
That sounds so good.
And then the second show was in 2015, and it was called 100% Certain. And so one work from that show is actually here. So
on
is
one
that paper cutout.
the
That's what it
strength and
says.
union.
Yeah, strength comes from union. So at that time, it was around 2016 in Venezuela, there was like a lot of political polarization. And I really wanted to create a body of work that had a really big sense, overwhelming sense of positivity and togetherness. And all the messages were quite political in the sense that they had that undertone of, like together we can like bring down the government or whatever. So that was what anchored a lot of that work. And 100% Certain as the title was more like a promise to myself as an artist that I was like certain that I was going to pursue this. So
something to live up to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
What you mentioned about the posters coming from, multiple voices and a collective, I think is a key thing that connects both of your works, because it's not like you're both like creating. It's very particular what you do. You can tell that it's yours, but it is as if you are capturing the swirl of many voices and different voices around you, and finding a way to kind of like freeze them for this little moment, and then they kind of like are let go of. John, I wonder if you could speak a little to that, about like how you're capturing like what's kind of coming up, like a song lyric, something you might have overheard, or a commonly used phrase like up shit creek, because you're not, it's like you're, like the words are like found objects or something, and you're like treating them in those ways and then like shaping them. So yeah, I wonder if you could speak to a little about that many voice kind of quality.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that found object's a pretty nice description, actually. I hadn't really thought about that before, but it is, excuse me, of course, there's billions of words out there, and I guess I'm always listening or on the lookout for things that are particular and resonate in certain ways for me that I think might be a way exactly of capturing something of the time or of the place or of the moment or of the politics. I make a lot of, I'm writing these things down as they kind of come to me. I try and, if you overhear something or see a headline or someone says something on TV, to try and grab that, and I just make notations. I've got lots of lists. There's no sort of system to it. You just write them around either in my diary or if paper's around, And then you just work your way through all of those. Like, not everything gets made, you know, it just, there's way too much. And one of the, I guess, particular things, or possibly hardest thing is deciding that, you know, at the start, like what will be the word or what will be the saying that might be worth pursuing in the artwork. I mean, of course, I'm totally interested in how to present that, and painting is the main thing, although they go out in different mediums. But, you know, once I've got that and committed to something, then you do find a way to kind of make that, you know. So hopefully those words and sayings do have a sense of coming from different places or different voices, or, you know, we were talking about it last night about, you know, it's a world full of lying bastards. Like, where does that come from? I mean, most people could probably have some, you know some lying bastard, or are a lying bastard themselves, or, you know, you only have to turn on any news to see there's plenty of them on there. And and it seemed to me like there was more people lying these days, or in recent times, and still is. And so it seemed like that was the conversation to get involved in, I guess.
Yeah, and what I think is so powerful about your work is that you never know how you mean it. Like, are you being like accusatory, or are you saying that the other people are lying bastards but not me? And I mean, I've been haunted by, and I think I've told you this, that work that you did, do what you say you're going to do, or whatever. And it's like, fuck. It's like every communication, it's like, okay, I said this. So it's like a cultural super ego that you're constructing. And it's like, we all are like judging ourselves or feeling judged by your work in some particular way. Have you been aware of that when you've been?
I think so. Like, I'm not, you know, I'm not trying to preach to people about this. Like, I'd like to present it, and yes, you can find your place in that, and it might make you consider your behaviour. And so I like that about it, you know, because I consider my behaviour all the time, and I think that's important for all of us. I mean, I'm not saying none of us are perfect. I'm not, but that you take responsibility for that. And so I think that, you know, I like that if people maybe have to decide where they stand in it, whether they agree or disagree, or it could sometimes, I like that it can almost have double meanings in it. It can be seen this way and this way, like, which way are you going to go? You don't have to make a choice in that, but it's there for you. Ultimately, you maybe have to, consider it, rather than it just being, you know, I just look at that and go, oh yeah, that's okay, and wander past it. I mean, there's probably moments of that as well in my work.
Yeah, but there's always this sense that the work is holding us to account, but we don't quite know why. And I think that's why it's successful, because it's destabilizing and it kind of goes in. In relation to that idea, Nadia, I wonder how your work has been experienced in Venezuela, both by your family, obviously, and friends. But is there a sense that, you know, you're kind of like the protest methodology, I guess, and kind of solidarity, how that's been felt, you know?
Like in Venezuela?
Yeah, how it's been received. And
it's interesting because there is like kind of no way to measure that previously. When I was making those works, it was just like family, friends, that extended network. But then in 2019, I did a project for the city of Sydney, which was the New Year's Eve artwork. And that actually got broadcasted to like millions of people. And then all of a sudden, like this audience, which was like, you know, like my people, like, had seen my work. It wasn't the work that the work for the city of Sydney was. It was very positive. It was called Wonder. It was about celebration, et cetera, et cetera. And so it wasn't like the political posters that were seen, but everyone did see this work. And all of a sudden, I was doing like radio interviews in Venezuela, and I had such a desire to connect, and then it happened through that project that was really, really powerful. Another thing too is how the work is like received by like the diaspora and like the community, the Latin American community in Australia. Because that's kind of one of the other questions that I ask in my work, like how do we contextualize our identity in this place? And so that relationship is really interesting. It's one that just to hear people's feedback or how they can see themselves in it has been really great.
Yeah, beautiful. I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit perhaps about how that relates in relation to the paper cut works.
Yeah.
Because paper cut has a particular tradition, and you often use those, I understand this correctly, as like everything's in them, and then you take elements out and make other work in relation to that. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so the paper collages in my practice, they're kind of like the foundation to the rest of the work. So they influence the textiles, and now there's more of a sculptural component in my practice too. So they kind of all emerge from these paper cutouts. And for me, all of my ideas go on there. It's like a sketching process. I'm collecting text and anecdotes and symbols, or even kind of like newspaper clippings, sifting through my phone for imagery and just going for it, going kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what led you to do paper cuts in particular?
In particular.
Like, I think that's super interesting.
What led me to do paper cut? I think that it was I think we maybe had a project. Actually, the first paper cut I did was a band poster.
Ah, cool.
For one of my ex-boyfriend's bands, which was called Big Strong Brute. And so, yeah. So yeah, I don't know what drew me to paper cuts in particular, but like I was really inspired by arte popular, like popular art that I grew up seeing in my grandparents' house, and that shows like images of everyday life, and that's kind of what I wanted to portray in my work, like what my everyday life was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a nice way to begin, a series of works by, assuming, being quite detailed, working with positive and negative space. You kind of can move those things around before they get fixed in place. So, it's a beautiful way of kind of generative note-taking, I guess. I think I should throw it open to some questions from the audience. So I'm just like circling myself. Any questions? Sam, do you have a question? No.
It's complicated. It's like bureaucratic in the sense that my passport is expired. And like the last time I went home in 2016, there were a lot of protests going on. I went with the whole intention of like getting my passport renewed, and it's just kind of nearly impossible to do those things. I think a lot of my family have left the country as well, for like, like a lot of them are in a more of a precarious situation where like they don't have running water, electricity gets cut out in different moments in time. Like the quality of life has really dropped. I think there's a lot of people that maybe have always had wealth in the country and can kind of manage, but for the majority of the population, it's like very, very complicated. So it's tricky. It's like
it had nothing to do with your Sydney project.
No. Yeah.
Could I ask John,
That question was about the choice of words over, I guess, figuration. I started out making figurative paintings, some that are in the show here. Maybe at about, 8 to 10 years of figurative work, I couldn't quite see where I was going to go with that. There was also this, and of course I was only just starting, but there was still some thing about, he's the guy who paints the guys in the car kind of thing. Like, there was this sort of sense that I had that people had just had me over here going, that's that artist kind of thing. So I didn't really like that either, like getting I felt kind of pigeonholed right at the start. But I ran out of a little bit of steam with the figuration, and then I was like thinking of what were the other ways I could still talk about this same subject matter. Because for me, those early figurative paintings up to this painting behind me, they kind of feel like they're about the same thing to me. They look quite different. I made a few paintings at the start that sort of had some stylistic figures still in them and words starting to connect into that. The first actual word I made was the word Kingswood. And because I've been making paintings around a sort of car culture in a way, but coming from my own experience, to keep to progress that, a friend gave me a Kingswood logo of a 60s Kingswood. It was in this beautiful kind of lettering, and they had found the logo, someone had pulled off a car. And so I made the painting of that. And when I made that, it was very interesting because I thought, wow, that one word opens up for me, and maybe for other people, this whole kind of world of a bit like Australiana, that the Kingswood was this, kind of car that was about who we were or something. And it was a kind of revelation to think, wow, the word can do that. And of course, as you say, there's the power in the word. And so the thing then was to be that, so it just was about how to paint that word. And I think the painted word is different to the word on the page or the word in the book, that you spend maybe different time with it. It looks different. Like when I just, sometimes I draw out the word and I have to, check the spelling of it because it just looks so different when it's isolated. And so has been the interest to me, the use of words, that they are, of course, very powerful. People did say to me at the start, like, why would you bother painting the word? Like, they're everywhere. We see it everywhere around us. But I do think when you bring it into this context, it does have an extra kind of power to it, or something about when you present it as an artwork. For me. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. It's more than the word, of course, or the saying. That I would like to think that is the starting point of it, and then, yes, these things really open up.
Can I just...
Do you want to say something?
Yeah. When were your first words? Because we talked a little about this, like your interest in, like, I guess, modernist poetry, E.E. Cummings and Sylvia Plath, and you can kind of like see both of those things filtering through your work, and especially what E.E. Cummings does with, words on a page, lowercase, like a lot of air around them. Anyway,
I think that's so I started writing poetry. That was like my primary medium before I became an artist, or maybe I was already. And I wrote poetry. I used to perform it, and those were the writers that really influenced me. And I think the words kind of stopped making sense after a while, or like my way of arranging them. And then I kind of started making work directly to try to connect to like my culture, my heritage. And for me, it was about creating a new language to describe what to me seems so complex and difficult to describe. So in that way, that's when I started to engage like my family members, and that's when I started to find like beauty and poetry in what they were sharing with me. So for my mother, it was her recipes. For my grandfather, it was his anecdotes. And I went further back to like create a whole body of work about my great-grandmother, who was just who like really embodied a moment in time in Venezuela in her community. And yeah, I think that's why I'm so attracted to phrases, because I feel like they bring together the collective. When I choose a phrase, I'm paying homage to either a group of people or a particular person, and I feel like they then become part of the work. And then too, with the symbols that I use in my work and the pictorial element, I'm always trying to distill it to like the simplest of lines. Like for me, marrying that with the text in like its utter simplicity. It's like what I'm interested in.
I mean, I think for both of you, but that sense of like you're revoicing, you know, and so you're like sharing authorship and dispersing authorship, which is why both of your work feels so generous and inclusive, and I think kind of unique in this country in that way. Frauke, you had a question?
Yeah, so that was a question about a work that I did, a mural work in Melbourne last summer at one of the metro tunnel kind of hoardings. And the text was, "Your best is good enough for me." And it came through the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art in Melbourne. They did a project, Who's Afraid of Public Space, and they took a lot of projects outside the gallery. And this was one of them. And I guess I was and that saying has been floating around for a while. And again, with the public projects, you know, it's not just about saying whatever the hell you want. That, you know, you've got to, I guess, rein some things in, and people aren't going to put up with, you know, they might call offensive language. When I say offensive language, I'm just talking about swearing. Like, you know, they're not going to have a big fuck yeah on the side of the building in Swanson Street. It would be great if they did, but they're still not ready for that. So, and we were looking for something that had a particular spirit or something, as they saw it coming out of this, you know, fairly heavy lockdown in Melbourne, and, you know, incredible time for all of us. And the saying of that for me does have some ambiguity to it. I guess, as Robert was saying before, like, it makes us think about our place in it. That's what I was thinking. And for me, it was, you know, if you do your best and give it your best shot, then I'm okay with that. You know, and it doesn't matter whether that doesn't come up to certain standards or you don't get the job finished or whatever. It's fine. And I remember it sort of started with a friend of mine who asked me to, I think he wanted me to sing something to put into a video or whatever. And I said, okay, like, you know, I can sing. I'm not a great singer. And I'll give it my best shot. And he said, your best is good enough for me. And I'm like, okay, I will take that, you know. And so, yeah, we've all probably got our own version of that, of what that is, of what your best might be. But also a bit like we were talking before, you know, there's some, I guess, commitment to something in that is what I like, you know, that you commit to give it your best. And if you fall short, it's fine, as long as you've given it your best. The thing that shits me is when people don't, you know, or when they just Not for reasons because they can't or something's got in the way, but they're just a bit too lazy to bother with it or something. So
I just thought it's a little bit lazy too, because she'd be alright.
I was thinking of near enough is good enough, which is a very Aussie.
yeah, well, I've used.
More positive what you're saying.
I've used, yeah, well, this I hopefully did have a little more positive feel to it. So, you know, I've been feeling more negative, for sure, in my work in recent times, and but in what, you know, how the world is, of course, but still to present these things, I'm still aware of, like, to present something. So, you know, you don't just read it and go, oh, we're all feeling terrible about this or something. That, you know, there's a way to engage you into it. You still might, maybe once you read it, not feel so great about that. But She'll Be Right is something that I've used over the years. And I used it many years ago. But I very quickly altered that, you know, because, again, I was just kind of pissed off with that saying and how it had been. We just use it here like, yeah, it's all right. It's not. And also that people say it, and, of course, they're not taking care of business, you know, and so it's a kind of false thing. So I'd make she'll be right, and so the right had fallen over, or it's on the ground, or it's spelt back to front or something, with this idea that it's not all right. It can be and should be, but it was a real throwaway line, and I don't know, something had been hijacked about that I didn't like, and so I mean, sometimes you just say it, you know, but I'm not so invested in that or something now. I used to like it because I did like that idea. If someone said that, you were like, great, they're taking care of it, it's going to be all right. And increasingly, people aren't, and so that annoys me.
Sam, you had a question?
Yeah, I was interested, John, in when you're writing lyrics, I guess what one, whether the art text or the lyrics, what one kind of, there's one that generates the other. If I guess you come up with a line for an artwork and you're like, there's something more in that is kind of too long for a canvas that I want to explore. Or if you're writing lyrics and then you sort of isolate a part out and go, oh, actually that could be interpreted differently, or that could be communicated more visually than audibly, and sort of how those two spoke to each other.
Yeah, look, it goes both ways. You know, sometimes you will make the painting and then think, that could be a great kind of chorus line, you know. Your Best Is Good Enough for me, I was like, now that could be great in a song, and I've started to fiddle around with that as a song. A young artist, a friend of mine in Melbourne, who did this incredible cover version, like a lockdown cover version of one of my songs, which I never thought anyone would bother with that. But he did it and was great. And then he saw that work and he wrote a song inspired by that. And I was like, damn it, he's got in before me in I Can't Really Do Your Best Is Good Enough for Me, even though I didn't have the rest of the song because I couldn't quite work out what to do with it. But I had this great chorus, Your Best Is Good Enough for Me. Anyway, I haven't done anything with that. But that came after thinking about that as a song, after the artwork. And things can go both ways, like, driving down to Wye River in 78. Of course, I've got a song about that as well. I can't remember exactly which came first with that. So it can go back and forward. And I guess with most things, there's usually a range of possibilities with it. Like I make a lot of works on paper and prints, and things can go into neon and things like that. So it's not necessarily like I've just used that saying once or that word once. I can use them over and over, and I'm happy to do that. And it can go into different forms or formats, or even years later, use that same saying again if I think it's still relevant or something. I also never really liked that idea that because the ideas are hard to come by. Like, it's hard once you actually find that, and then to go, oh, right, and then the outcome of that is this one moment here, and then that one moment might be exhibited possibly for maybe a month somewhere, and that could be the end of that. And that always disappoints me a little bit as well, that you go, wow, I came up with this really great thing, and that's all that happens. Like, that's the kind of end of it or something. So I might go, I'll make more of that. You know, I'll make some other versions, or I'll make a song out of it, or I'll make a neon out of it. Yeah, that's of interest.
A question over here?
Yes, I wanted to know if you said your work was meant to connect with your family, your background. Being a Venezuelan artist here, and when you refer to audiences, makes you feel more Latina. You think you can feel and connect and speak about the whole continent that is so little known of?
Wait, what was the last bit? Sorry.
If it makes people curious about knowing about your country and Latin countries in general.
Yeah, like, does my work make people curious about getting to know like Latin America? Is that the question? Like, is it?
Feel that
If I feel.
now represent more, or your voice is also like a Latin voice,
I
a
get.
Venezuelan voice.
I think definitely like a Latin voice, but that's also like such a big responsibility, you know. I think it's. I was talking to Espacio Latinx. This is like a Latin American space in Perth, and they interviewed me, and a couple of people came to see the show, and that was really special. I think when I arrived in Australia, I arrived in Brisbane, and it was really difficult to find or connect with other Latin American people, and that's happening more and more and more. And yeah, I think we have such a, you know, there's so many different countries. Our cultures are so diverse and so rich. And in a lot of ways, like for me, using like the particular stories that my family have shared or passed down to me is really important. Like, I feel like I can't speak for all Latin people, but it's definitely like a huge honor to get to like also be representative of our culture. So yeah.
Has that been something you've struggled with, about being a spokesperson for? Because what I'm hearing is that, yeah, exactly. But the particularity of the relationships and how that is given voice in your work means that you can be authentically expressive and connected and speak about a continent, but not a continent at the same time.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. I think the best is, I mean, for me, like the most special aspect of it is, say for example, in this trip, that interview, like I was interviewed by an Argentinian woman, and then I got to meet like Colombian women yesterday as well, who are also part of that space. And yeah, culturally we're very different. And I think it's really important to know that, to not see Latin America as one thing. But at the same time, we do have a connection and similarities in our culture. So yeah, I don't see myself as a spokesperson, but there is like an affinity there with like other Latinx artists and creatives. Yeah.
Perfect. Any more questions?
Quick question. Coming from a Spanish-speaking background, how does that translate into work? How does that translate in your mind to your Spanish-speaking ancestry?
So coming from a Spanish-speaking background, I guess, yeah. So like the text of my work is in Spanish, and I think language is really important to me. The main thing about using Spanish in my work is like mainly related to that ability to connect with my grandparents or older family members and sort of hear their stories and understand their stories directly. I always found it interesting to see how it would resonate like in an Australian context, like bringing in another language and sort of seeing how people will relate to it. But I think the energy that comes through the work and color and in materiality and in those choices, I think allows it to resonate beyond what the text says.
I think there's a phonetics to it too, because even I don't speak Spanish, but I'm hearing it because I'm seeing it, and there's a rhythm to it that's played out. So I feel like your works speak in that way. Yeah.
I think the other thing about that for me is that I don't speak Spanish either, but just it engages you because of that. Because you go, well, I wonder what that means. And that in itself is the kind of way I like to think, in my work it's a little bit, in these works, abstracted as a way to bring them in. For me, in your work, and it's sort of interesting this because, we didn't know each other before we came to do this show or anything. Robert's put us together here. Things are being revealed in a way as we go. And I'm just sort of thinking about that now sitting here, that it encourages me to find out what that is and then to think about that. So just, it would be quite different if you had just written that straight or painted that straight in English. That it's forcing me, if I'm interested, or any of us who are interested, to go up, find out maybe what that translation is, and then start to think about that as well. So you have, for me, just by making the works in Spanish, forced me to kind of go in a little bit harder and to find out what they're about.
I should say the same for me too, like soul, sun, and the beaming faces, and it's like, wow, it's like rippling out for me, that beautiful thing.
I think that was one of the intentions as well, because in wanting to bring people into the conversation and using that sort of as a tactic to start a dialogue, to kind of delve deeper into like the meaning of the work and what else was in it. And then the other thing with the Spanish that I'm using is that I'm also really interested in the particular idiosyncrasies of like our Venezuelan culture, but not just the country, it's like also the particular regional towns that certain family members of mine are from. And there's a lot of words that like a person of a Spanish-speaking background from a different country might not be aware of, because they're very particular to like the Andes or Barquisimeto, where my grandma is from, or Caracas, where my grandfather is from. So like there's extra layers of
I think there's a lovely like regional nuance and particularity to both of your work. I feel like we should end. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate you being here. And thanks so much for your time, both of you. It's been incredible. Thank you.